Hello, buenas noches, Mingarlaba. Welcome to a celebration of women writers in translation. Thanks for joining us this evening or morning if you're logging on from Thailand or Myanmar. My name is Catherine Fletcher, and I'll be your MC for this program. I'm thrilled to be sharing the Zoomosphere with a group of really wonderful writers. As we settle in, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our sponsoring organizations. First, the Muse Writers Center is Eastern Virginia's nonprofit literary center. The Muse offers creative writing classes for beginning and experienced writers, including adults and children. It houses a resource center in Norfolk and hosts readings, open mics, and special events like this one. They provided tuition help for over 1,000 people. And for a list of current offerings, please do see their website. Behind the scenes today, we have Susan Deutsch, the Muse's program manager, running our tech. So thank you very much for that, Susan. Our second sponsor tonight is the Poetry Society of Virginia. The PSV's mission is to advance the cause and appreciation of poetry throughout the state through readings, workshops, contests, school programs, and other activities. Our current poet laureate, Luisa A. Gloria, is curating a series of free workshops. So do check our website as well as her website, social media for more information. There's one coming up, I believe, on August 22nd, and they'll be offered throughout the fall as well. Now to our program's focus. For those of you who don't know, August is Women in Translation Month. It's a project started by literary blogger Maytel Radzinski. The mission is to promote reading and writing of women writers in translation. Only about 30% of the translations done into English is work by women, and we aim to balance that out a little bit more. Tonight, we have translations of Spanish poetry by the Mexican writer Tamar Leon and Burmese short stories by Tada Ailey. We're also joined by writer and translator Kurt Hackbarth, U.S. poets Pachenda Bao, Sahar Marathi, and poet laureate of Virginia Emerita, Carolyn Kreider-Ferranda, who will all speak about the influence of other languages and traditions on their own writing in English. After the presentations, we'll have a brief question and answer period. A quick disclaimer before this reading gets started. All work read by the author is her original work and is owned by the author unless otherwise noted. Some of the work here today is published in print or online, and some of the work may be unpublished. This live stream today is in no way a publication of unpublished works. A recording of this event will be available on the Muse YouTube page and on the website. So with all that business out of the way, let's begin with Pachenda Bao. Raised in Virginia and currently living in New York. Her thoughtful poetry often invites the reader to explore fundamental questions about our humanity. Welcome, Chenda.
Thank you to the Poetry Society of Virginia, the Muse Center, and Catherine for inviting me to be a part of this event. And thank you to everyone in the audience. I'm so honored to be sharing space with all of you. I'm going to read my remarks because I'm feeling rather anxious, and so I hope you'll forgive this likely stilted delivery. I'm really relieved to be going first because I'm not quite sure how I fit in here as a speaker, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to everyone else's work. Recently, I heard Kaveh Akbar read at the New York City Poetry Festival, where he prefaced one of his poems by naming his anxiety about it. It was a poem that contained Farsi words, and he was in the midst of learning or relearning that language and felt very nervous about reading it aloud. That nervousness about a language that is ostensibly yours by heritage or familial connection is really familiar to me. I gave Catherine multiple opportunities to disinvite me from this panel, but I am grateful for the opportunity to think about language and the ways in which different languages belong and don't belong to me. I was born in Cambodia, and my first language was Khmer. However, I grew up in the United States, in Virginia actually, and so the language that I think most belongs to me is English. As a Cambodian diasporic writer, this brings up so many personal vulnerabilities about my work. I am continually aware of the many silences, the people who didn't survive, the stories that didn't get preserved, the art, literature, history, cultural, and familial bonds that were destroyed for Pol Pot's year zero. And I'm hyper aware of the way the subject of genocide sometimes cuts off the conversation and leaves it in a perpetual state of consuming and consumptive outrage. I think many of us in the Cambodian artistic community feel this immense weight of responsibility, this need for truth telling and truth weaving to hold us in place, to assert our and our ancestors' existence, and to connect our resilience to that existential imperative. We are here because we survived. Because we survived, we are here to say so. But who are we speaking to? And who are we speaking for? Who are we in conversation with? And what do we feed with our language, our attention, and our stories? I don't read or write in Khmer. I can speak and understand it enough to get by, mostly. A source of shame, perhaps. But who or what does this shame serve? Is my work rooted in and obligated to my particular heritage? Or is it necessarily entangled with the dilemmas of war, displacement, and US and European interference and imperialism? Probably a lot of both. I've been trying to stop viewing myself and my work through a deficit lens. In what language can my work grow? How can my work make language grow? There is room for everything, and maybe this is part of being an artist, to be always making room. I think I'm a poet because everything makes sense to me and also nothing makes sense to me. And the only bridge between the two sides are the words I come up with. I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you all. I'm still learning so much, and there's always more. But one of the best things about being a nobody writer is that sometimes you just agree to do things that you don't think you're qualified for, and then you prepare and make a new path for yourself. Maybe this is not unlike translation. Last year, I met Isabella Lopez, who is an artist based in Bogota, Colombia, through a collaborative poetry and textile art exhibition called Threads, which opened in Bogota, came through New York City, and now is in a gallery in Manila in the Philippines. Isabella created a work of textile art in response to my poem, My Mother Tells Me to Build a Monument to Her Father, which she chose from a random set of poems I had sent to the curators. At first, I had some hesitation because this particular poem still felt very personal and private, not yet ready for the limelight. And the weight of responsibility to my family and the Cambodian community felt very heavy. Isabella and I were total strangers, communicating over email, but somehow we made this connection through art making. I was really drawn to the connection she felt to the poem. She made me realize that my family story was kin to other losses, other histories, and other attempts to recover from a rupture. She wasn't familiar with the history of Cambodia, so I shared a little bit about my family. I got permission from my mother to share our family photos, and I didn't know what she would use or how. I just hoped for the best. So she chose to use my mother's family portrait to make a screen print. It's a dynamic and poignant piece. Isabella writes of the work. In this artwork, the textile warp is intertwined with a photograph that contains the memory of a family history. Through the subtlety and transparency that evokes the unraveling of the weft or counter-weft, I seek to generate a metaphor in relation to that father figure that, despite not being in this physical plane, is still intertwined with the present of those who still inhabit it. I'm so grateful to Isabella for her beautiful work and this generous gift to my family. I love the way she attenuated my grandfather's image, making the boundaries of his absence clear, yet the family is still whole. The work is light and almost ephemeral, a fitting monument to my grandfather. Nothing I had ever imagined I would want or need, yet this marker of family grief was so nourishing. Isabella also translated my poem for the gallery in Bogota into Spanish. And since I happen to know Spanish better than Khmer, I'd like to read her translations and then my originals, which are still in progress. I found it very interesting to see what another artist does with my words. It's a reminder to me that in making art, I'm always making leaps into the uncertainty and unpredictability of it all. And I think that maybe this is at the heart of all my work. So I'd like to share a photograph. So this is the photograph of my mother's family. And my mother is the young woman on the left, and my grandfather is sitting. And then these are her siblings and her mother. And then this is a photograph of the gallery, in the gallery in, I think this was in New York City at the Flux Factory. So I'll read the poem first in Spanish and then in English, and also forgive my accent. Mi madre me dice que construya un monumento a su padre. Para proyectar una sombra alta, sé un hombre. Sé un hombre con hijas. Sé un hombre arrancado de su hija. Sé el hombre por el que ella permanece siempre vigilante. Sé el hombre que fue la medida de todas las cosas buenas e imposibles. Sé el buen hombre, el buen padre, el buen marido, los buenos modales, la buena tierra. Y que su asesinato regrese a ella cada año bueno y malo, a través de todos sus hijos buenos y malos. Nunca uses la palabra trauma. Sé una buena hija que conoce su lugar. Aprende a ser como la superficie del agua, abriendo paso a cada onda de violencia. Sé buena para llevar las historias que se cuenten en susurros, porque no son para niños buenos. Aprende a ser como un planeta solitario, incrustado en el vacío del espacio, que no puede llevar ningún sonido. No digas una palabra en respuesta. My mother tells me to build a monument to her father. To cast a tall shadow, be a man. Be a man with daughters. Be a man plucked from his daughter. Be the man she never wanted to be without. Be the man, the measure of all good and impossible things. Be the good man, the good father, the good husband, the good manners, the good earth. Then be his murder returning every good and bad year through all her good and bad children. Don't use the word trauma. Learn the loneliness of planets, how the vacuum of space cannot carry any sound. These are terrible stories that are not meant for children. Marred memories, missing pieces, held breaths, the unspeakable inventory of living grief. Here is death's familiar orbit around constellation of ceremonies. Like the surface of water giving way to each ripple of violence. Be the good daughter who knows her place is to survive beneath the tall shadow. Don't say a word in response. And then I'd like to share one other poem that Isabella had translated for me because she chose this picture to make her art And the poem that I read actually it's not based on that picture, but I wrote a different poem based on that picture. So I shared that poem with her, and then she was moved to translate it. This one's called Mi madre está detrás de su padre. Me encanta esta fotografía. Mi padre vivo, con la espalda recta, con su uniforme de policía bien planchado, las manos descansando en su regazo, y yo de pie detrás de él, casi una mujer, todavía sin lanzarme al mundo asesino. Mira cómo una vez éramos un conjunto. Si sé que aún vivo, lo afortunada que soy, pero nunca quise esta vida sin su protección, su constante vigilancia. Incluso ahora conjuro su forma frente a mí. Paso a través de él para llegar a mí. My mother stands behind her father. This photograph is what remains. My father alive, back straight, his policeman's uniform neat and pressed, hands at rest on his lap. The family forever arranged around him, each direct gaze holding still. And there I am, standing behind him, nearly a woman, not yet launched into the murderous world. We made a whole set once. Don't lose sight of this. Tell me to count my blessings, the lives spared, the abundant future. But without his protection, without his steady watch, even now, I conjure his unkillable shape before me. If you need me, go through him. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks very much for those very moving poems, Jenna. Para continuar, bienvenidos a Tamara Leon and Kurt Hackbar. They're both distinguished members of Oaxaca's formidable literary community. They're going to be presenting new translations done especially for this program. Gusta en veros, over to you.
Muchas gracias a todos, a todas. Estoy muy agradecida por esta invitación de Catherine. Me siento honrada por acompañar a estas grandes mujeres escritoras y muy feliz porque espero mostrarles un poco lo que hago y espero que les guste. Voy a comenzar con una serie de poemas que he estado trabajando, una parte por esta enfermedad que estamos viviendo, una enfermedad moderna, y espero que les guste. Esto es para Tostado. Olvidamos el nombre de los días. Tuvimos miedo del aire fuera de casa, de quien respira al lado, del que pasa por atrás. Miedo de besos y abrazos, a las manos conocidas y a otras. Miedo a tocar superficies. Y miramos montañas de ataúdes en la prensa. Dejamos mesas, calles, amigos, salas de trabajo. La hierba creció en el parque y tapó los caminos. No respires, no respires, no respires. En cada bocado hay virus, nanopartículas que vivirán en tus pulmones. Los llenarán de vacío, bolsas muertas colgadas en tu espalda. En tu pecho cargarás hierro, no podrás moverte. Tu cuerpo es una gelatina, un pellejo de dolor. Inútilmente puede entrar algún centímetro cúbico de aire. Aire, aire. Buscamos aire limpio, espacio. ¿Cómo podríamos tener sana distancia entre nosotros? ¿Alguna vez tuvimos relaciones sanas? ¿Así sanaremos? Un regalo del mundo es un abrazo, un beso, tocar tu mano. Solo quiero eso, tocarte. No puedo. También estás enfermo. ¿Quién le puso el nombre a los días? Recuerdo, tal vez se llamaba marzo. Cerré la puerta de mi casa y así quedó muchos meses y olvidamos el nombre de los días. Los lunes eran jueves, los jueves eran domingos. Hoy solo es un día. Volví a conocer a mi madre y su gusto por las plantas. Regresaron carcajadas y largas pláticas en la mesa de la cocina. Las flores crecieron entre los ladrillos, volvieron insectos, flores, pájaros. Explotaron frutas de los árboles, lluvias de escarabajos para anidar en la tierra. Solo yo salí por comida. Lo traigo conmigo, me limpié los zapatos y si la contagio, ¿podré morir? Pues claro, si me enfermo no vayas a buscarme, no quiero ayuda. Usen la cama y el respirador para alguien más joven o más grande que sí lo necesite. Seguramente ya me enfermé y soy inmune. Sí, claro, porque precisamente tú serías asintomática. No es posible con tanta nicotina fumada. Un año esquivando la enfermedad, escondiéndome de ella en las esquinas, detrás de un pedazo de tela. Entre mis manos que taparon mi nariz, llenas de jabón y alcohol, las vi craqueladas, caían a pedazos pequeños. Tal vez era diciembre o enero. Esperé la vacuna como un salvavidas, un círculo amarillo en el océano flotando entre el mar de gente enferma. Lo sabía, siempre lo supe. Cuando comenzó el dolor me estallaba la cabeza, calentura, vómito, sin aire. Lo sentí. Tuve la conciencia de cómo entró a mi cuerpo. Aún dormida viajó en mis venas jugando a la resbaladilla entre la nariz y la espalda. Pedro, no te conozco. Estás en el crematorio. Tus ojos brillan entre la máscara y el tapabocas. Dices que es solo un trabajo. Te repites eso mientras con todas tus fuerzas jalas mis desechos patológicos, como lo llamó el médico a mis estructuras celulares. Me introduces a la cámara en una cama de cartón. Pedro, enciende el horno. Ahora le voy a pedir a nuestro querido amigo Kurt que nos haga favor de leer la traducción.
Gracias, Tamara. We forgot the names of the days. We were afraid of the air outside, of who was breathing next to us or passing behind. Fear of kisses and hugs, of hands known and not, fear of touching surfaces, and we saw mountains of coffins in the media. We left tables, streets, friends, offices. The grass grew in the park and covered over the walkways. Don't inhale, don't inhale, don't inhale. There's virus in every mouthful, nanoparticles that will inhabit your lungs and fill them with emptiness, dead satchels hung on your back. You will carry iron in your chest. You won't be able to move. Your body is jello, a hide of pain. Not 1 cubic centimeter of air can get in. Air, air. We want clean air. Space. How can we keep a healthy distance between us? Did we ever have healthy relationships? Is this how we'll heal? A gift from the world is a hug, a kiss, a touch of your hands. I only want this, to touch you. I can't. You're sick too. Who named the days? I remember maybe it was called March. I closed the door to my house and it stayed that way for months. And we forgot the names of the days. The Mondays were Thursdays. The Thursdays were Sundays. Today is just a day. I got to know my mother and her love for plants again. Laughter and long conversations returned to the kitchen table. Flowers grew around the bricks, and insects, flowers, and birds came back. Fruit burst off the trees. Showers of beetles fell to the ground to nest. Only I went out for food. Should I bring it with me? Did I clean my shoes? What if I infect it? Could I die? Well, of course. If I get sick, don't go looking for me. I don't want help. Use the bed and the respirator for someone younger or older who needs it. I'm sure I already had it and am immune. Yeah, right. What a coincidence that precisely you would be asymptomatic. No way that's happening with all the nicotine you smoked. A year of dodging illness, hiding from it around street corners behind a piece of cloth, between the hands covering my nose, so full of soap and alcohol they were cracking into little pieces. Maybe it was December or January. I awaited the vaccine like a life preserver, a yellow circle in the ocean floating amongst a sea of the sick. I knew it. I always did. When the pain started, my head was exploding. Fever, vomiting, no air. I felt it. I was well aware of how it entered my body. While I was still asleep, it shuttled through my veins, shooting down from my nose like a child on a slide. Pedro, I don't know you. You're in the crematory. Your eyes are shining from behind the face mask and shields. You say it's only a job and repeat this to yourself while you haul out my pathological wastes, as the doctor called my cell structures, and slip me into the chamber on a bed of cardboard. Pedro, light the oven.
Historia de la muerte. Tu muerte se llevó los días del mundo. La noticia de tu partida no me sorprendió. Ya la esperaba. Pasé muchos días, muchos meses, muchas horas pensando en tu fin. Frente a mis ojos, tu cuerpo estaba muriendo. El primer muerto fue el corazón. 3 infartos lo dejaron seco y siguió porque le exigiste que continuara trabajando. Las ventanas que volaron con tus ojos se cerraron. Tu cuerpo fue muriendo, quería morir. Tus células se mataban entre ellas, desde la nariz hasta las piernas. Pero tú querías vivir, le ordenaste levantarse. Buscaste maneras para sobrevivir a costa de otros organismos cercanos al tuyo. Parásitos le llaman. Pegado a mí, alargaste tu vida. Tus ojos se alegraron, tu piel otra vez húmeda, tu sangre volvió a correr como un río entre los brazos. ¿Cómo se corta un río? No sé. Yo lo corté con mucho cuidado y nos dolió demasiado. Desde la lejanía te observé y vi cómo fuiste muriendo otra vez. Ese cuerpo grande, fuerte, se fue quebrando. Primero un dedo, un brazo, la pierna. Estabas roto. Toda tu vida estuviste roto. Pasaron años y por fin él, tu cuerpo, se cansó de ti. ¿Cómo culparlo? Ahora solo hay tierra y cenizas en tu garganta. No te moverás de ahí. Esta fue tu última vida. Para ti no habrá más allá. Nada. Aquí acabó todo.
A story of death. Your death swept away the days of the world. The news of your departure didn't surprise me. I was waiting for it. I spent long days, long months, long hours thinking about your end. Before my eyes, your body was dying. The first death was the heart. 3 attacks dried it out, but it kept on pumping because you forced it to. The windows that flew with your eyes fluttered closed. Your body was dying. It wanted to die. Your cells were killing each other from nose to legs, but you wanted to live, ordered it to get up, looked for ways to survive at the expense of other organisms close to you. Parasite, that's called. Joined to me, you lengthened your life. Your eyes brightened, your skin became moist, your blood flowed again like a river between your arms. How do you cut a river? I don't know. I cut it with great care, and it hurt us terribly, even so. I observed you from a distance and saw how you began dying again. This big, strong body was fracturing. First a finger, an arm, leg. You were broken. Your whole life was broken. Years passed, and finally your body, got tired of you. How can I blame it? Now there are only dirt and ashes in your throat. You won't move again. This was your last life. There won't be any great beyond for you. Nothing. It all ends here.
Niña Nor, rodaste por las escaleras. Tus piernitas no soportaban una pendiente. Llorabas pensando en el mundo mientras mojabas tus guaraches en los arroyos del pueblo. Tacones apurados envolvían tus pies. Un maletín dejaba escapar documentos al aire. Intentaste regresarlos con el pensamiento. El fin de tus manos eran uñas limadas. Escribían en la máquina al ritmo de tus zapatos. Soldados de cascos rojos marcando el paso. Viviste sin tiempo y pocas horas soñaste. Tu enojo nos exilió. No querías dolor, pero nosotros también nos diluimos en tus recuerdos. Fotos atacadas por el agua. Vuelves a ser niña, le tienes miedo a las flores y tus ojos se ahogan sin razón. Una y otra vez buscas lo que no has perdido y recuerdas procesos complejos, pero no sabes qué día es hoy. Niña, cabello blanco, devuelvo a tu amor con un helado de limón. Pocas cosas te hacen feliz. Vas a dormir y tomas la mano del minotauro para perderte.
Girl, you rolled downstairs. Your little legs couldn't handle the slope. You thought about the world and cried while you wet your huaraches in the Pueblo's streams. Rushed heels enveloped your feet. A briefcase released documents into the air. You tried to put them back with your thoughts. The ends of your hands were filed nails. They typed to the rhythm of your shoes, red helmeted soldiers setting the pace. You lived without time and dreamt little. Your anger exiled us. You didn't want pain, but even in your memories, we dissolved away. Photos attacked by water. You become a girl again. You're scared of flowers, and your eyes well up for no reason. Again and again, you look for what you haven't lost. Remember complex processes, but don't remember what day it is. White-haired girl, I returned your love with lime-flavored ice cream. So few things make you happy. you will sleep and take the hand of the Minotaur to lose yourself.
Gracias. Ahora, Catherine, ¿puedes ayudarme a compartir las fotos de este siguiente poema? Es con base a una obra de Mariana García. Ella es una artista visual oaxaqueña. La manufactura es muy delicada. Podemos pasar a la siguiente fotografía, por favor. Y bueno, el material es un fieltro de lana que es muy suave, pero adentro vemos que son alfileres. Y esta obra de Mariana García se llama Habitar la violencia, y voy a leer una pieza que dice a propósito de esta obra, que se expuso en Oaxaca este año. La casita. El brillo no permite ver lo bonito de la casa. Puerta abierta. Ruido de agujas en mi cabeza. Alfileres, puntas, estalla. Atraviesan mi piel. Sangre por todos lados. Golpes. En mis uñas tu carne, tus cabellos. Quiero arrancarte, tropezarte, agrietarte, morderte, apretarte entre mis dientes. Me golpeas, me pateas, me atas, me atacas. Arrancas el último pedazo que tengo. Puerta cerrada. Silencio gotea en el sillón, el comedor, las ventanas.
La casita. The shine blots out what's pretty about the house. Open door. Rattle of needles in my head. Pins, tips, burst. Pierce my skin, blood everywhere. Blows. Your flesh, your hair and my nails. I want to rip you, trip you, crack you open, bite you, squeeze you between my teeth. You hit me, kick me, tie me, attack me. You tear off the last piece I have. Closed door. Silence drips off the couch, the dining room, the windows.
Muchas gracias. Cort, no sé si me puedas hacer el favor de explicarles la pieza de Mariana. Gracias.
¿Cómo se dice otra vez? Mariana.
Mariana García es una artista visual de Oaxaca e hizo esta escultura, se llama escultura blanda, a propósito de la violencia intrafamiliar que se agudizó durante la pandemia.
So what Tamara is saying is that this poem is based on what we saw in the image by a Oaxacan artist called Mariana, ¿cómo se apellida?
García.
Mariana Garcia. And it's called Escultura Blanda, which is a soft sculpture. And that house that you saw there has to do with the increase in domestic violence that occurred in Mexico during the time of the pandemic. And the poem was based on the work of Mariana.
Pues muchísimas gracias. Estoy con una gran emoción por compartir con ustedes. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Tamara and Kurt. How our perceptions have changed and how our situations have changed so much in the past 18 months. The pandemic, as well as other odd situations. Next, I'd like to welcome Sahar Muradi, also joining us from New York. She weaves her way through spaces between languages, weaves languages together. Over to you, Sahar.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for this gathering. Thank you to my fellow writers. I'm in such awe and respect of your work and look forward to hearing everyone who hasn't gone. Thank you to Muse Writers Center and to the Poetry Society of Virginia as well. It's really an honor to celebrate translation and multilingualism, and particularly women in translation and women who navigate multiple languages. And I think as writers, as writers and those of you here who also love writing and maybe writers as well, we are drawn to the beauty of language. But I think as artists who move between multiple languages, in addition to that, there's a special attunement to the pain and play of language. And you know, we are aware of and look for points where languages collide and meet, where they rub against each other, where they fail one another, where they hide. And I think as translators, and I don't count myself as a translator, as a very amateur, sometime translator, but mostly, as Catherine said, a weaver of words, of languages. I just want to really express my gratitude because, like Chenda, as someone who has sort of a complicated relationship to my heritage language, which is Dari, D-A-R-I, which is one of the languages spoken in Afghanistan. It's really through translation that I was able to access my heritage language and to enter, aside from, you know, being spoken to it at home, but if I wanted to read the literature, it was often through translators. And I just want to shout out my first translator in life and sometime and beloved co-translator, my mother Shaima, who is in the audience. So yeah, I'm indebted to you and to those along with you. So I just will read a few poems that integrate my mother tongue. And I'm going to start with a couple that are concerned with how language, the role of language in war and the violence of language. This poem is called Salam Alaikum, which is the greeting in Arabic as well as in Dari and throughout the Muslim-speaking regions and communities. And you'll hear two languages here, or three languages here: English, Dari, as well as Bambara, which is spoken in Mali and throughout West Africa. But my connection here is through Mali, where I spent some time and have some friends. And what I was interested in is there's many resonances between Afghanistan and Mali, some parallels. They're both Muslim majority countries, landlocked. They both are dealing with, they both have a history of either war or occupation and are dealing currently with extremist militias. But they also, both in Dari and in Bambara, they, in these two languages, they share a beautiful, I would say, elaborate greeting system. So when you say hello, it takes a while to say hello to a person. But here, the poem is looking at how that greeting or how that language changes during war or conflict. Okay. Salam alaikum. Salam alaikum. Once, when I was a girl, Ini Sagoma, I believed in morning like a hot yellow apple. Mondana Boshin, We never tired. Father said, God is good. Here sira. We slept in 2s and 3s. Famil chutorest. It was a matter of everyone. Sumogo bedi. Someone had work, someone didn't, someone always offered something. Auloda hubastan? We were kids, but we knew everything. We belonged to everyone. I sigina. After prayer, there was tea. After tea, there was fruit. Bifarmayin. Mother taught us to draw our feet, to let others go first. Ni tile. In time, day gave way to night. Jonathan Jorest? Someone would show up asking for my body, then another. I degoche kakene. We would exchange brothers who were not our brothers. Khodaya shukr. The earth met us in different ways. For some, it rained. For others, there wasn't water for the stones. Ah barika alaye. We thanked God for blessing us and not our neighbors. Khuda Hafiz. History was the first to leave and without a trace. Ani wula. Father said the night has hands. Mother reminded me of the apple. Shab bakhair. In the dark, I held nothing. The next poem, still concerned with violence and language, but here I'm really interested in the sound of words, and I think as a lover of language and languages, I oftentimes, I'll hear something in Dari and it's so poetic. It's like a poetic phrase, or I hear a word within a word. It doesn't have that word, but it has a shadow of another word, and it happens in any language. So here, just interested in how a word can have the hint of multiple meanings. But specifically, the poem is looking at the American war in Afghanistan, which has created over 2 million widows, and the function of language. Words by which to tell time. Sul, peace. A word that ends silently. A word whose feet never touch the ground. Siu Asht Sol, 38 years. Not unlike Siu Ashk Sol, 30 tears old. Bewa, widow. Could be be, without, wa, and, without and, without her and, without her conjunction, the coincidence of two heavenly bodies at the same celestial longitude, bewa, without her heavenly half. 2 million bewa, 2 million halves in heaven. Salah, weapon, so near sul, how one might use one for the other, as in drone for lull. Bomb, a word that ends silently, a word whose feet never touch the ground. Here, bomb, a word with a tail in another country, a tail that lands clearly, firmly, a sound that splits their mouths. The next poem is called Washi, which is a word that means wild or savage in Dari. So it's, sorry, that's wrong. Sorry. The title of the poem is Washi / was she, and Washi does mean wild or savage, and was she is English for, it could be a question or, you know, a statement, it's a phrase. And here, between 2003 and 2005, I lived and worked in Kabul, where I was born. I came here at the age of 3, but I went back as an adult and a couple of times, but that was the longest period I was there as an adult. And really there, it was a profound experience, but one of the things that happened to me while I was there was this thing of where local and foreign men wished to tame my body, just as they wished to tame Afghanistan. So, you know, thinking in terms of development or reconstruction. And you cannot see the poem, but the Dari words appear in italics, but so do several English words. And I often think about that, how in the past we used to italicize non-English words, but I'm, you know, I'm glad that that's no longer a standard and that we are pushing against the boundary of English as a hegemon. So it's just calling into question words. Washi, was she? She was Washi. I told her, you are like your motherland, a wilderness, needs a belt. Laid down 2 white hotel towels, took her into the tub to wudu the boys out of her mouth, pointed her nipples toward Qibla, wiped clean her intention to perform ruku, as if carrying a glass of chai on her back, fold at the knees, palms to the ground, tucked her soles under her astaghfirullah, used country. In my used country, I felt his teeth circle as a mosquito, the black mystery he placed my right hand over my wrong stain and said he was bringing me home, offered me a sweet with a lock, a key in the shape of a brother, perhaps 22 years old, my body pure as a glass table. He spilled, was she, my boss on my back at night, came easy as a fly to post-conflict, faithfully used my country. I'm gonna move away from the darkness into a slightly less dark but still complicated topic, which is that I'm a relatively new mother and actually expecting again, and so happy to be in the company of some mothers here. And I made the decision to raise my daughter in Dari, even though my native mother tongue is compromised, is limited, is weighed down by a very heavy American accent. All the da-da-da-da-das, despite that, it was a decision, a political decision, a heart decision. And despite the fact that I often have to call my mom and ask her, how do you say? So this poem really is looking at loss of language for those of us who are in diaspora and not by choice necessarily. And it's written as a ghazal, which is an ancestral form for me. And it's written in couplets, and you'll hear a refrain and a rhyme before the refrain. Ghazal for mothers and tongues. It may be a broken, a shrill mother tongue, but I'm raising my daughter in my ill mother tongue. Translating Seuss and Nagara on the fly. Siosafed, I'm fine, but at zebra, I'm still mother tongue. The air is English, the water too. How will you get past her gill, mother tongue? Morning and night, I call modad. What's the word for guilt, mother or tongue? A bat is a leather butterfly. Turtle, a stone frog. Dari 1, English nil, mother tongue. We are writing our own kitab, you and I. Oh, the things they try to kill, mothers and tongues. Papa climbs Zina, get moon, she instructs. I'm over the matab, each sprinkle of mother tongue. Nafasem kiast, I ask. Soma Ali, she beams. In a word, my breath, and my dil, a mother's tongue. And I'll just close with this poem that really is a love of language. So, to the bright. A language entirely. She notices the shamal in the trees. We call it dancing. I wonder if I could teach her language entirely in metaphor. This is a leaf yawning to the ground. We have 2 starfish, right and left. The clouds are playing piano again. She already gets this. Of the neighbor's umbrella on the balcony tilted, she says, "Chao," asleep, folds her hand under her ear, head tilted. To not correct, to allow the pleasure of the construction, of the gesture, how she distills. For giraffe, she runs her hand up her neck. For elephant, 5 fingers swing under her nose. Her economy is expansive, the same single syllable for multitudes. Ma for Mother John, grandmother. Ma for most, yogurt. For marmite, for cousin Mateen. We must train our ears to her tongue's subtleties. She builds by repetition, reinforces by rhyme. Soon, like enters the room. Sound to me like growling bear. Look to me like window. A wedge, approximate. So begins a life of separation. In February, she says plainly under our gasps, grass, trees, and barf like diamonds. Stars, moon, and bed like diamonds. To see one in another is to see as one another. We watch her eyes as much as her mouth. Mucher, she corrects me. I like ice cream mucher. The robot lost its eye. No, the robot is winking. Because to say is to see, the power of a tongue accelerating, revving repeatedly, of teeth marking the earth. We listen with the hunger of old eyes. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone everywhere joining.
Thanks so much, Shahar, for that beautiful collision of images and sound. It'll be echoing my head for some time. Next up, we have painter and poet emerita, poet laureate emerita of Virginia, Carolyn Crater-Ferranda. She is going to share with us a multilingual, multi-author work and the created bonds between poets who wove it together. Carolyn.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here with so many accomplished writers. And also, I'm excited to be able to have the chance to share with you information about a collaborative book that I did. Seasons of Sharing is the title of the book. It's a Case and Rinku collaboration. The collaborative authors, Joyce Brinkman is Indiana Poet Laureate Emerita, and she actually came up with the idea for this book. And then, of course, you see a photo of me. And I also work as an artist, as does Catherine Obel, a poet and artist from France, Flor Aguilera Garcia from Mexico, Gabriel Gabriel Glang, who's a German-American writer and also an artist, and Kai Mori, a wonderful poet from Japan. In 2007, Indiana Poet Laureate Joyce Brinkman organized and hosted what we call the third biennial gathering of Poets Laureate. During my term, in addition to running all over the state, I traveled to South Carolina. I traveled to, as I said, Indianapolis, to Block Island, you name it. I went everywhere and worked with other Poets Laureate, and that was exciting. While we were in Indianapolis attending this gathering, I met Kai from Japan and Flor from Mexico, and Joyce and I just formed a great bond with them. They were tremendous writers and speakers. Joyce suggested that we try our hand at writing Keizen Renku. And what I thought was, well, you know, we're going to reach out because that's what a Keizen Renku is all about. And I invited a friend of mine, German-American artist and poet Gabriel Glang, to join the project. Now, we met way back in the 1970s in a graduate poetry class at George Mason University. And then we set up a poetry critique group, which met actually it was for years at Gabriel's home in Washington, D.C., across from the zoo. And she finally moved to Germany in 1990. Now, she recommended that we ask Catherine Aubel. Gabby had worked with Catherine, who's a French writer, and they had written a couple of poetry books together, which featured haiku and tankas. And there they are. You can see the abstract art in the background. Both Catherine and Gabby have worked with abstract art and realistic art, but they are just incredible. And all of this had a huge impact on our book. It is a Japanese link poetry. It goes all the way back to 759 AD. Now, in essence, it's just like what we're doing tonight. Catherine came up with this great idea of putting together this collaborative. I mean, in a way, this is a work party. And with the Keizen Renku, the poets focus on nature and they use traditional images. For example, the moon, flowers, and love. And now what we tried to do in our Keizen Renku was we wanted to capture a single season and reflect the natural environment from different global perspectives from all over the world. And each verse plays off of the preceding verse. Now, this is where you really work together. Just like I could see, already we have poets here tonight who work together. I can feel that and I love it. Now, the first poet writes a haiku, 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second, 5 in the third. And then the international partner responds to that and writes 2 lines of 7 syllables each. And then the third poet responds with a haiku, of course, 5-7, 5-syllable count. And each poem is 36 stanzas in length. Yes, we kept going that long. We did everything by email. That each foreign partner translated the poem into her native language, the German, the French, the Spanish, and the Japanese. And I want to share with you excerpts from 3 of the poems so that you can see more closely how we worked. We started off with Summer Wind. Now, Joyce wrote the first haiku, and then Flor responded. I wrote the second haiku, and then Flor responded to that. Summer wind. Summer wind blows south, pours heat on expectant night. Moon melts into dawn. Days swim up rivers like carp slowly into dusky seas. Skies flare and flicker. Lightning bugs pierce ebony screens amidst a glow. Happy tears from Tlaloc's rain, welcoming the tender corn. And of course, those of you from Mexico know that Tlaloc is the Aztec god of rain, fertility, and also water. Now, my husband and I, after we left the DC area, we moved and set up a wildlife retreat. So I actually still get to see the lightning bulbs. I know a lot of people don't get to see them anymore, and I write about the environment and our need to protect it. In fact, you can see in the background a butterfly that my husband painted. It's a monarch butterfly. We raised and released monarchs in honor of people like you for several years until they wiped the milkweed away. One year we raised and released over 200 monarchs, believe it or not. And we will continue to give back to nature. If you could see the animals that cross our territory, you wouldn't believe it. Now, in the next slide, look at the beauty of the Spanish language. I have just been enthralled by listening to the Spanish tonight. And what I love about it is that it's so musical. Flor brought this out, which I think is very perceptive. I now write haiku all the time in my mind as I try to figure out how to say something with greater rhythm and punch. And that says so much about what she's trying to accomplish. In Winter Sky, we worked with Gabriel Glang, our German partner, and we focused obviously on winter. December sky spits, shooting stars speed over earth, words traverse the sea. A snow globe blizzard swirls, syllables settle, 2 lines. Up they whirl, eddies of flakes lit up like fireflies, Christmas on the bay. Epiphanies, constellations portend a coming sea change. Now, just speaking about a striking revelation, I love the way Gabby does this in the last 2 lines, warning of this coming sea change and looking at winter and trying to see all of the marks of winter. And of course, I picked up on the flakes looking like fireflies because I love them so much. You can see the German translation for those of you who know German. And what Gabby said is so insightful. You know, what do we get out of the experience of writing together? Gabby said, one author can't just go off on a tangent, dance in a quick, hot tango with some darling or other just because it's splashy. It's rather more like a symphony. If you want interesting harmonies and even disharmonies, there has to be some kind of higher order. You have to listen deeply to each other and respond in an appropriate and authentic way. And here's something that's extremely important. It's not about individual egos, but rather about coherence, creating a seamless whole. And I can see with those of you who work together that that's what you do. You're not trying to be better than the next person. You're trying to write a poem the next go round that's better than the one you wrote before. If we start getting into competing, that's when we destroy ourselves. Now, in the next poem, Autumn Rain, I wanted to show you this because this is the one that we wrote with Kai Mori, and there's something she does that I love that really shows this sense of collaboration in addition to what she had to say. Autumn Rain. Fall's moon does not shine. Storm volleys hammer windows, missing light and you. My loneliness passes through the road filled with bush clovers. I feel you in fog, lingering past nightfall's bell. Hummingbird, stay, 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 merry light of houses on silent water surface. And look how Kai, I mean, she knows this form so well. She knew how to pick up on what I said was stay, except she showed us something else, another reason to stay, to look at the merry light of houses on silent water surfaces, where I was looking at the hummingbirds. Now, Kai said, and I love this, as a poet, I support the harmonious importance of Renku for peace in the world. And that's what the ancient poets did in Japan. Keizen Renku is a rosary which connects us to the heart of poetry. And then she says what Gabby said, and a symphony which leads to a new dawn. Peace, that's what I want. I like to be happy. I like to feel a sense of peace in my heart. And that's what Keizen Renku is about. At the translation, isn't that beautiful? I mean, we don't have to know the Japanese language to appreciate this. As an artist, I see this as a work of art hanging on a wall. And in this next slide, I want to talk for a second about other lessons that we glean from working collaboratively on Seasons of Sharing. For me, I like to delve, as I said earlier, into understanding nature's enigmas. I think it challenges our observational skills. And as an artist, I'm constantly looking. You'll even see that if you ever see me in person, you'll notice that I'm just looking constantly around and observing. And here in our woodland setting, I look at the flutter of damselflies or the sparring contest between blackbirds and grackles when the grackles are here before they migrate. And all of this demands that we select the most expressive words. And that's what I heard tonight in the poems and the writings that have been shared. They're lyrical, they're engaging, they talk about universal themes that capture the reader. Now, Catherine looks at visual haikus. I mean, she sees everything as visual lines sprouting about and in a state of bareness, and that's the way she starts to paint. That happens with abstract painting. And then Gabby sums up the collaboration. I mean, Joyce sums up the collaboration by saying, I would say poetry is the most concise, powerful, and memorable form of writing. Well, I think all forms of writing can be memorable, but we loved working on this case in Rinku and felt that way. Now, I just have a couple more slides to show. We went all over to promote Seasons of Sharing. Here we are in Maryland. Believe it or not, Catherine and Gabby flew all the way over here to give this reading. Gabby flew to Indiana and I did too. We had a reading there, which Joyce organized, and that is Joyce holding up our book. In the bottom, these are slides from a book tour that we took in Germany. And you can see Gabby, Catherine, and me standing there. We were in Tübingen about to give a presentation at a book fair, and Joyce and I on the bottom right are in a bookstore. Here we are at the Tübingen Book Festival. Now, I should tell you that my husband he's from South America. He's a native Spanish speaker. And believe it or not, I fell in love with him before I could even understand Spanish, before he knew English. It's just one of those wonderful meetings. But he read Flore's translations for us. And then we were so fortunate because we had a Japanese woman in the audience who read a part of Kai Mori's translation. So we were able to read portions of the poems that are in the Keizen Renku in all languages. Now, if anyone is interested in a signed copy of the book, please just contact me via my website and I will be more than happy to give you the details. Thank you so much. It's like I said, it is an honor to be here with so many accomplished writers. I feel very fortunate and I've learned an incredible amount tonight just by doing what I said, observing and listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. What a gorgeous, intimate way to celebrate our interconnectedness,
Thank
as
you.
well as connections to the natural world. I'd like to welcome at last from Bangkok. We're very, very pleased to have Todd Lee. Sorry, I'm butchering her Burmese name. Here, she's an accomplished journalist, socioeconomic researcher, and novelist. Please give her a hand.
Thank you. Hello all, I am Dora Ile from Myanmar. I'm now talking to you from Bangkok, Thailand. It is very early morning here. So first of all, I would like to say my sincere thanks to the Muse Writer Center and the Poetry Society of Virginia for giving me a chance to join this event. And also, I really thanks to see all my fellow writers. Because in this moment, as you see, my country, Myanmar, which is also known as Burma, is now falling under the military coup since the 1st of February 2021. Though it has been already over 6 months and almost 1,000 people were killed and over 7,000 protesters and human rights activists were detained, our people are not giving up our hope and not surrendering. So we keep fighting. During the protest, at least 3 poets were shot dead, and many poets, the journalists, the film star, and also the well-known authors were arrested. So I would like to honor all these courage protesters and artists who are being tortured and oppressed in the prison by reading some piece of my writing here. Because I feel that I'm reading these on behalf of them and on behalf of people inside the country where the freedom of expression has been lost. So before going to read, I would like to share a little bit about how Burmese authors were struggling under the military gender. Because in my country, the military grabbed the people, the power from the people 3 times in 1962, 1988, and 2021. Then in 2010, we had some political liberalization and democratization process was started, but it lasted only 10 years. Now we are falling into the dark again. So in the previous military regime, we witnessed 2 ways of art presentation in our country. The first one is the art was applied as a propaganda tool by the gender. The words of praise which were referring to the goodness of the military government were put very darkly and repeatedly into the propaganda song, movie, and stories. These are state-led propaganda programs. And the second one is that due to the restriction on freedom of expressions, the artists try to reveal their expressions in a subtle way. We didn't have the right to talk about the poverty, the rise of price, jobless, politics, and injustice in the ethnic regions. But there were many authors, poets, and artists who tried to represent their voice and sufferings of people through their art. They didn't use the direct words or expression against the military, but when we read their story or poem or viewed their art, we could feel what they wanted to say. So they used metaphors and symbolism in their creations. However, as the country was forbidden by the international community for years, our connection with the war families were cut off, and the things what we had created were just given less chance to show off. That's why I'm really glad to read my writings here. So that is the background of my country. And now today, I am considering to read some parts of my short stories, Innocent or Not, that was written in 2011, and I submitted to Iowa International Writing Program when I joined their program. The story is, I guess, simple and ironic. There were 2 main characters in the story, a woman and who is working as a social worker and a stray dog. The women in my story dislike dog, but when a stray dog comes and seeks a refuge under her apartment building, she doesn't want to receive. She doesn't want to accept him and wants to drive him away. But the dog has a big wound and it is bleeding a lot. So she doesn't know how to do and what to do. So whether she should save the dog or ignore. Though she is working for an humanitarian organization and always trying to value humanities and justice, she cannot show her kindness to a stray dog. She is fighting with her ego many days. Finally, she decides to save the dog. But at the time, the dog is dead. So what I want to say from that story is human is human. We are not God. So we have both dark side and light side. We have anger, want, love, jealousy, kindness, everything. But we have to control our dark thoughts and feelings by wisdom, rational thinking, and moral values. However, it's not easy to do everything politically correct because human is human. So I want to present these things through my story. Previously, our fellow writers and poets, they reading the poems, but now I'm reading a short story, but because of the time limitation, I cannot cover the whole short story. So I would like to read only the opening chapters. And I think, I'm not sure how many of you ever heard of Burmese speaking. So let me start reading in both languages, English and Burmese, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, innocent or not, I am very hearted these days, especially whenever I meet his eyes. I want to forget those eyes, to avoid them as much as possible. These looks make me shiver. These days, he is the center of all my spiritual musing. When someone asks me how powerful he is, or what kind of power he has over me, since he is able to take control of my mind, I can't give a satisfactory answer. This he is the poorest of all. To be more precise, he is a dog, a stray, a throwaway, always bullied by stronger groups of dogs, always shouted at and driven out by everyone. Those who know me well would laugh if I said I was obsessed with a stray dog. I've never before become attached to a pet, liking tidiness and fastidiousness as I do. But there is an exception. Because of him, I broke all of my strictly enforced rules and restrictions. It was a long, long time ago. When I was an adolescent, I developed those restrictions on my own. As I recall, it was dark, a summer evening. It happened suddenly at dinner time, after I had returned home from school exhausted. At that moment, I glanced out a window near the dining table. There I saw a cat in a nightmarish situation, jumping from a brick wall to the roof of our neighbor's house. She was delivering a kitten, which dropped down from her belly. I had not been paying attention to her wailing earlier, not realizing she was suffering the pains of labor. I just didn't notice her. It was perfect timing. As soon as she landed on the roof, her baby entered the world. Since the house next door was a single-story building, the scenes of that cat in labor could be seen clearly as if it were shown on a big screen. Naturally, she knew how to catch the umbilical cord on her own, and she had that little red fetus which could not be recognized as a kitten as her dinner. That scene has haunted me ever since. In that moment, I even vomited at the meal I had been eating. It was shocking for me to face a violent and disgusting act suddenly and unexpectedly. Later, after reading books and conversing with my daughter friends and having gotten to know more about rabies and other infectious disease animals carried, nobody needed to remind me of the fact that animals were to be avoided at all costs. Those experiences connect me to that stray dog. Is he becoming a part of my life? Am I becoming a part of his? All I can say for sure is that I cannot love him. In Burmese, ခုတလောကျမစိတ်တွေလေးလံနေသည်အထူးသဖြင့်သူ့မျက်လုံးများနှင့်စုံသည့်အချိန်တိုင်းပေါ့ထိုမျက်ဝန်းများကိုမြစ်ပစ်လိုက်ခြင်းသည်တနိုင်သမျှရှောင်ကွင်းသွားလိုက်ခြင်းသည်သူ့အကြည့်များသည်ကျမကိုကြောင်ချောက်ချားဖြစ်စေသည်သူသည်ယခုရက်ပိုင်းအတွင်းကျမ၏အာယုံဝင်စားမှုတိုင်းကိုဖန်ဆုပ်ထားသည်လူတဦး၏မနောကိုပိုင်ဆိုးနိုင်စွမ်းရှိသောအကျဉ်သူသည်အဘဲများသောတကိုးတတိနှင့်ပြည့်စုံသည်မိကဲ့သို့သောစွမ်းအားမျိုးပိုင်ဆိုင်ထားသည်ဟုတစုံတစ်ယောက်ကများမေးမြန်းလာရင်ကျင့်တဲ့ဆရာအဖြစ်ကိုပေးနိုင်လိုက်မည်မဟုတ်ပါကျမယူညွှန်းလို့သောသူသည်တာမန်တကတာမန်ထက်နှုံချတော်သူသာထ ထို့ထက်တိတိကျကျပြောရရင်ခွေးတကောင်ထက်မှန်အသေးစိတ်ပြီးဂုံအင်ပြရပါကလူတကာအော်ဟစ်မောင်းထုတ်တော့အင်အားကြီးခွေးတစုဤအမျက်ဘိုးကြခြင်းကိုခံရတော့လမ်းဘေးမှာအနုစုပ်ဝစ်ဂုတ်ဆုပ်ခွေးကွဲစားတကောင်အမတန်အသက်မြင့်ဆိုင်သူဇီစာကြောင့်တဲ့သူမို့ခွေးဝဲစားမပြောနဲ့မြည်သည့်အိမ်ဝေးတလိမ့်ဆန်ကိုမှမခင်တွက်တတ်တော့ကျမကအောက်တန်းစားခွေးတစ်စကောင်ကိုဆွဲလန်းနေပါသည်ဟုဆိုရင်ကျမဤပဝန်းကျင်ကအကြောင်းတည်သူများကဟာတိုက်ရီမောကြလိမ့်မည်လားထူးဆန်းမှုတစ်ခုဟုသာဆိုကြပါစို့သူနှင့်ဆက်နွယ်ခင်မှုကြောင့်နှစ်ပေါင်းများစွာအယိုးဆွဲလာတော့ကျမဤကတ်သက်မှုများမှာချိုးဖောက်ဖို့အကြောင်းဖြစ်လာတော့သည်ကြာတော့ကြာခဲ့ပါပြီကျမအုံလုံးသိမ့်သက်သည့်အရွယ်တွင်စိတ်ပြည့်စရာထိုကန့်သက်ချက်ကိုမိမိတူဦးတဲ့အမြင်ဖြင့်စီးကြဖို့ရာဇလန်းစတင်ခဲ့သည်ကျမမမိတလောက်ထိုနေ့သည်တခုသောနွေရာသီဤမှောင်စပြိုးသည့်အချိန်ကျောင်းကမောမောနှင့်ပြန်လာပြီးညစာစားနေသည့်တည်င်းကအတွင်းမှာပင်ဖြစ်ပါသည်ထိုအချိန်တွင်မှတိုက်တိုက်ဆိုင်ဆိုင်သမင်းစားစပွဲနှင့်ကက်လျက်ရှိသောဗရင်ပေါင်းမှအင်ပြင်ဘက်သို့ငေးမိသွားသည်ကျောင်းတကောင်ရဲ့လေသူကစားပြီးကျမကိုအိမ်မဆိုးတွေပေးခဲ့သည်ထိုကြောင့်သည်အုံနေရန်မှတစ်ဖက်ဤခေါင်မိုးပေါ်သို့လန့်ခုန်လိုက်ချိန်တွင်တန်ဆိုးရှာသောသူတရေသားကထွက်ကြလာသည်တိမတိုင်မီကတော့ကြောင်မခမများမွေးဖွားခြင်းလွန်၍ငါကျင်စွာအော်ညီနေမိလားဆိုတာကျမမသိနိုင်ပါကိုအာယုံနှင့်ကိုဖို့တတိမထားမိတာလည်းဖြစ်နိုင်ပါသည်တစ်ဖက်ခေါင်မိုးပေါ်သို့သူရောက်ချိန်နှင့်သူရင်သွေးပြပလောကသို့ဝင်ရောက်ချိန်ကတစ်ထက်တည်းကြသည်တစ်ဖက်အိမ်ကတစ်ထက်အိမ်မို့ခေါင်မိုးအစုံမှထိုကြောင်မှသားလျှောသည့်အဖြစ်တစ်နှစ်ကိုပိတ်သားပြင်ပေါ်တွင်ရှုမြင်နေရသလိုကွက်ကွန့်ကွင်းကြီးမြင်နေရသည်ကြောင်ရဲ့လို့ရုပ်လုံးမပေါ်သေးသည့်အမိဝမ်းတွင်မှကျွတ်ခါစအနီဥဒရဝတေးသေးလေးကိုသူမိခင်ကဘာသာဘာဝအတတ်ပညာဖြင့်သူ့ဘာသာချက်ကျိုးဖြတ်ပြီးညစာအဖြစ်ကြာကြာနာနာဒဇင်းစိတ်ပွဲတော်တီးလိုက်သည့်မြင်ကွင်းသည်ထိုနေ့ကစပြီးကျမကိုတမြင်းမြင်းဆောင်းနှံတော်သည်ထိုစဉ်အခါကစားပြီးသားညစာတို့ပင်ပြုတ်အန်ထုတ်ပြရသည့်အထိစွမ်းလန်းကြီးတဲ့တော့ကျမအတွက်တော့အေးရမယွန်ရှာဆက်စုပ်စီရပြစ်မှုချင်းနှင့်ပပင်းတိုးလိုက်ရတယ်လို့ရင်တုံစရာကောင်းနေတော့သည်နောက်ပိုင်းစာရွေဖယင်းအသိစီယံဝင်များနှင့်ဆွေးနွေးရင်းခွေးယောဂနဲ့တိရစ္ဆာန်မှတဆင့်ကုဆက်တတိအခြားယောဂများအကြောင်းသိလာရတော့တိရစ္ဆာန်ဆိုရင်ဝေရာမဏိဝေးဝေးရှောင်ခြင်းလို့ဆိုတဲ့မှာညီသူကမှသတိပေးစရာမလိုအောင်ကိုအသိရှိနေတော့သည်အဟိတတိဆံဖြစ်သောကြောင်ဆုံးတကောင်တွင်စာနာခြင်းတရားကိုသွားပြီးရှာဖွေမိတီကိုကကျမ၏လွဲချော်မှုပင်ဤသို့သောနောက်ခံအကြောင်းတရားများနှင့်ကျမကိုအနီခွေးဝဲစားကလာပြီးပတ်သက်ချင်ပြီးသူကကျမဘဝထဲကိုဝင်လာတာလားကျမကသူ့ဘဝထဲကိုဝင်သွားတာလားတဲ့ပြောနိုင်ဒီမှာတော့သူ့ကိုလည်းကျမမေတ္တာထား၍ပြရနိုင်ပါချေ Thanks for listening. And also, I would like to thank my translator, amazing. She is my Burmese friend, and also my editor, Kelly Lockett, for translating this story. Yes, thank you all.
Well, Jesus Timbade, I don't know whether I said that right, but thank you so much, Tada Idet, for the reminder of how precious compassion and personal safety are. And also for telling us about the challenges the people and writers of Myanmar are facing right now. We're running a little long on time. I just want to take one moment to see if there might be one or two questions maximum from the audience. So if you are watching, if you could just put your question in the chat. Tada Ilet recently gave an interview in which she talked about how she'd like to have stories of resistance and resilience translated into English from Burmese. And our US media often chooses to present only certain types of narratives about our southern neighbor, certain parts of Asia, or even some of our fellow countrymen. So I wanted to ask you all, if you have a story of resistance or resilience you'd like to share, whether it's from your own writing or something that you'd like to reflect on here.
Well, I can speak very quickly about, I have the honor of being part of something called the Afghan Literary Futures Project, which brings together Afghans in the diaspora, particularly from North America, who are writers of different genres and who are creating. I mean, they're such talented. It's like a group of about 20 folks of different ages, different experiences as writers. And what I find so inspiring about them is because is that often in mainstream media and in literature about or either by Afghans in the diaspora, the mainstream literature or literature about Afghanistan, you see a lot of centering of suffering. And what I'm finding so moving by the work of these, many of them very young, but not all, is that they are really, centering other voices, voices of resistance, voices of joy, voices of thriving communities. So just to remind folks that, of our full humanity, that we are not just this single story of suffering or of occupation or flattened identity. So that's where I'm drawing inspiration from these days.
Sí, Tamara.
Sí, bueno, le voy a pedir de favor a Kurt que me ayude a hablar esto. Pues la historia de mi pueblo en México es de una gran resistencia cultural y de una resiliencia para continuar. En principio tratamos de conservar nuestra lengua y nuestras costumbres frente a un mundo que es avasallante respecto a las necesidades de las personas. Entonces, por lo menos yo sí estoy muy interesada en no solo la resiliencia de las mujeres para sobrevivir en un mundo en donde hay tanto en contra de las mujeres, sino como un pueblo. Me parece que en Oaxaca, los zapotecos o las naciones que convivimos aquí en Oaxaca, somos depositarias de una gran herencia que por medio de una resistencia podemos conservar hacia nuestras personas, nuestros hijos, nuestros nietos, y así lo han conservado nuestros abuelos. Entonces, creo que con muchos pueblos nos hermanamos en este sentido.
So what Tamara was saying was that Mexico as a whole has been a great struggle to carry on a cultural resistance in the face of a world that tends to steamroll over things like language and customs. She's very interested in women's resilience, especially when there's so much against them. In the case of Mexico as a whole, in the case of Oaxaca and specifically, where she's from, she mentioned the Zapotec nation and the other nations that live together in the territory of Oaxaca hold a great inheritance there, a great cultural inheritance, which is something that's been passed on from their previous generations, grandparents, and will be passed down to their children and grandchildren. And she believes that Mexico is kin with a lot of other nations in that form of resistance and resilience.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? Yeah. Chenda.
I just wanted to say too that, well, I think that like there is this idea that to like recognize like the resilience of different communities is I think I want to kind of like point out maybe that like these communities and where people come from, those places have always had like their own stories and have always had like their own histories that they're grappling with that are kind of outside or sort of kind of belong to them and are not necessarily like always a reaction to, I guess I'm just sort of tired of like always having to be like a reaction to like what the US did, or and like that's sort of what I struggle with as an artist, is to have my work always be in that frame, because there's just more to it than that. And actually just this week, a Cambodian American writer just published a collection of short stories. He's a queer writer who actually he unfortunately died earlier this year, but he just his book was published posthumously. It's called After Parties, and it's a collection of short stories, and it's just a really interesting. It's just really interesting the way that he writes stories that seem like he's just writing it for himself almost, it's like stories that really entertain him, and it's questions that are really perplexing to him. And this is what I'm really like loving about it, is that it's not, it's not, I mean, obviously, like when you are not a part of the majority culture, like you feel responsibilities, you feel that weight of like representation, but I really like how it seems like people are kind of like breaking free of these categories that we're placed in, and they're just writing about whatever interests them, and it also starting to kind of maybe like poke a little bit at the idea of like, well, why shouldn't people be able to write about, like art? Do we always have to write about these things? Do we always have to write it in this way? And does it, who has freedom in what we're writing about? And then also like when writers, because I do think that like some of those concerns and those pressures are not felt as keenly with writers who identify with like the majority culture, writers who are heterosexual, white, cisgendered. Like they're all often assumed to kind of have like the universal stance, and so they can kind of like look at anything and write about anything. Whereas like if you have an identity that is I guess marginalized, like you're always like hitting up against that story of like, oh, it's amazing that you can write it all, almost. I mean, obviously people don't really say that, but like there's that undercurrent of like you're so resilient, your story is so resilient, and like you're here. But I mean, we've always been here, and I think and like people have always been here, people have always been writing stories. It's a matter of like who you pay attention to, and like maybe we should question like who gets the attention and who is giving that attention and who has the power to like make that call. And so I guess that's just what I wanted to bring up.
Last words, any? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Thanks for staying with us. This was very special, and I appreciate you all for sharing your time with us. Thanks to our audience. Susan, thanks for running the controls that made this possible. To the Muse, the Poetry Society of Virginia, I'll say good night, baina baina, and hasta la próxima.